Hello, everyone. I've got my large stack. You've got your tiny stack, but I've also got my glasses, which means that I can be in the interviewer role slightly more.
I feel...
And I just wanted to, if you don't mind, before we kick off, tell you about this rather weird and wonderful thing that happened while I was prepping for this event, which is I left the door of my car opened by accident, and my tote bag got swiped out of it, unbeknownst to me, with some books in it. And the next day I was looking for it, and I got a phone call from a lady who said, I've just picked up your notebook, which has got your phone number in it, and if you want to come and pick it up, it's here with a couple of your books. So I went to meet her, and she was standing there and said, you know, I never would have noticed, it was dumped in the bushes, I never would have noticed, but I would not mistake this cover. I wouldn't pass that for anything because I'm in the acknowledgements at the back of the book.
Oh, wow.
And it turned out she's an NHS midwife. And while you were doing the research for that, you called her. It was Alison. I don't know if you remember the call. And she said, I had the most wonderful 2 hours talking to David. And he asked the most brilliant and thoughtful questions, and he was so charming, etc. And this isn't just a small world story, because it told me 3 things about you. The first was that you really do the work. You really put the research in, because obviously, she said, you know, you had quite a lengthy chat, and that was obviously about one scene in the book. And the second thing is that she obviously found it a great pleasure to talk to you, as I know, and you're about to find out. And the third thing was that the thief must have read the book, because they never would have dumped it in the bushes if they hadn't read it, because it's a complete treat. And if any of you here haven't, if any of the back catalogue of David's books that you haven't read, you must pick them up, because I've just spent the last couple of weeks gorging myself on them, and they are gorgeous.
Oh, thank you very much, thank you.
So I just wanted to pass that on. But we're here to talk about love. Do you want to just lead us into, do you think of yourself as a writer of love stories?
I guess it's always a part of the books. Shortly after One Day came out, and you know, One Day was very much intended as a big, lush, kind of romantic epic over 20 years, I thought, well, I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to do something different. And I tried to write a book that didn't really have a kind of love story element, was just about fathers and sons, and was very dark and intense and kind of anti-romantic. Well, it was a kind of prototype.
Okay.
And I spent a long time laboring over this thing, this dark, stormy father-son Dostoevskian novel that wasn't really working. It took me a year to write a very small amount, 30,000 words, and I gave it to my agent just before Christmas, and we had a meeting on January the 3rd, and he said, I think you have to throw this away. You know, there's no love in it. There was, by which he didn't mean necessarily romantic love, but that it was a kind of slightly hostile book, that the characters didn't really, the father and son didn't really have anything in common. There was no reason for them to be together. It seemed a very angry book, and I guess that was transformed into a different kind of book, which is much more about married love and is a much warmer kind of book. But I guess I am inclined to include those stories. I wonder if I'd ever write a novel that was just a workplace novel, or a novel that had no kind of romantic is such a difficult word, isn't it? Because it suggests a kind of sentimentality, a kind of corniness, and I don't want to write that, but I do want to write a kind of a warm emotion, even if the emotion is one of sadness. So, the long way of saying that, yes, they are all love stories, but start of pretend, for instance, if you pinch together all the romantic scenes, it would probably be only about 1/8 of the book. Us started as a love story, but very much turns into a story about a father and a son. So there's something in there, but it isn't always my intention. I guess You Are Here is the nearest I've come to writing a very classic romantic comedy. I think it'll always be there in some form or another. But I'm curious with your book, did you think of it as a love story when you started writing it, or?
I can answer that, but then I'm also aware that we're here to talk about love, and in every couple there's a lucky one, and in this interview I'm the lucky one, so I am going to turn pretty quickly back to you after that.
Okay.
But I didn't conceive it as a love story, but it did sneak in. The love story elements snuck in, and not really so much the love story between Vita, my main character, and Max, the man she's engaged to, but the sisters, the love story between the sisters, that was really the beating heart of the book for me, and which does lead me back to you. We're going to keep doing this, but to the different types of love.
Yeah.
And I think what you may be very well known, probably because of the success of One Day, of being a master of romantic love. But actually, if you read your books all together, it's really clear to me that you're exploring all different kinds of love. Like you said, the father-son love and friendship and middle-aged love and first love. And do you think that word love, do you think it can contain all those different types of love? And which of those are you most interested in at the moment?
Oh, well, yes, it's interesting. I kind of, I did, when I was doing the publicity for You Are Here, there was a headline that said that I was never going to write another love story. And I guess what I meant by that was that when we think of a love story, we think of a love film or a romantic film, we tend to think of two people in their 20s in a city who you know, go out on dates, and there are misunderstandings and all of those things. And those things can be wonderful. That's a kind of a type of story that I really, really love. But I'm aware that I'm quite removed from those situations now in my own life, and that that when I think of the kind of stories I can now tell, there's probably a stronger family element, or I'm interested in parent-children relationships. And love is, in that respect, quite a sloppy word. You know, it does contain all of these things. It becomes a kind of another word for strong emotion, which is too big. It's too baggy.
It's like the Eskimos with all those words for snow, or is it ice? I can't remember, but it is like that. There are, and your books really can contain a multitude of loves. Yes,
I think so, and I think that word fits. I mean, Us started as a story about marriage. The working title for Us was Married Love, and as the novel progressed, well, the truth is, my father died halfway through the writing process, and without consciously doing it, it changed its theme, it changed its tone.
So you were writing the father-son book, and then your father died?
No, that I threw away.
Oh, I see.
I started from scratch.
Okay.
I started from scratch, and Us was a very different novel.
Okay.
You know, Us was a kind of complete page one rewrite. It didn't really contain any element except that there was a father-son element. And when my father passed away, I found the tone of the book changing and the subject of the book changing. And even then, it isn't necessarily about, it was really it really became a novel about unexpressed love, and about a father who is so buttoned up and repressed that he's unable to express what he really wants to, what he really should, both to his wife and to his son. And so I guess the rosiness that's implied in the word isn't something I always want to draw on. Often it's something that can't be said or isn't said or is thwarted.
There's a kind of remains of the day element to that book.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think everyone talks about having their favourite David Nicholls novel, and if someone had a gun against my head, I'd probably go for Us, because it's so rich with the things that he can't say. Yeah. And as a reader, you're sitting there saying, please say these beautiful things that you're saying in your head to your wife, because maybe she won't leave you, or to his son, and he can't. You write very brilliantly about that awkwardness in expressing yourself, but obviously you don't have much you seem not to have so much awkwardness in expressing yourself. Why does that particular strand of love or expressing love interest you so much?
I guess, the worst kind of love story is two people who really like each other and decide to start a relationship and have a great time. It's a kind of it's a non-story. I wonder sometimes whether it's possible to write a novel about a very happy, mutually loving relationship. Can you write a novel about a good marriage or a good, strong, long-lasting relationship? I think it might be possible, but when one sets out planning a novel, one's always looking for things to keep the couples apart. The obstacles. I mean, it's interesting that we both draw on Romeo and Juliet. If you take Romeo and Juliet and you pinch together the pages where they're happy and together.
Not so many.
Not so many. It's 2 pages, really, and 2 wonderful pages. But the job of the storyteller, I guess, is to prevent these things happening. And often the biggest obstacle to the kind of consummation of a relationship, whether it's between a parent and a child, or siblings, or a father and son, or lovers, is an inability to express oneself clearly and honestly.
Or you have some other brilliant obstacles in David's latest book, You Are Here. Everything keeps getting in the way, including the rather Victorian landlady, and there's just one obstacle after the next.
Yes, and that's fun to plan. What can stop them saying what they need to say, and often those obstacles are internal. I mean, I found it fascinating in your book that the obstacle was this condition, was this idea of chronic illness and the degree to which that was physical or mental and how it was preventing her from. I love the way you kind of made this very small world feel epic, and that was in a way the restraint that you imposed on the characters to prevent.
Thank you for saying that. I think that in my book, the illness started off as the villain, really, or the antagonist in the love story, as you put it. But through the book, towards the end, the book really becomes the hero, because it's the thing that cracks her open and makes her look at her life in a different way. So your antagonists, you don't often have a serious love rival as an antagonist in your book, do you?
No, and I've never written. Neither have I ever really written about infidelity. That's another, I guess, another obstacle that is out there. But I've never written a kind of the great adultery novel.
Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I guess I think it's hard to. It's hard to, it's quite familiar, I guess. I think when I was writing Us, Us is about midlife. I was writing a character much older than myself for the first time. And the cliche about midlife is it's the time in which men start to think about having an affair. And I really didn't want to write that. I wanted to write kind of the opposite of that, the flip of that. A man who is so uxorious, so happy and so desperate to hold on to something, even though he isn't necessarily behaving well in that relationship. It's the primary thing in his life, not something that he wants to escape, that there's something refreshing about that, but also slightly desperate as well. So it's a kind of almost an anti-adultery novel. And maybe I will write it, but I guess I just felt that it was a very familiar trope. I grew up reading a lot of those great books I really love and admire, 70s, 80s American fiction, where adultery is often the motive for the story, and it's just never something that I felt compelled to explore myself. The
cliche of it.
Yeah.
And do you think, I mean, we're talking about modern love here, do you think that it's possible to write about very modern love in the sense that as you get older and past the stage, well, hopefully you're not on Tinder and swiping left and right, but how do you think it's possible to key into where the zeitgeist is around dating in the way that you have done in your book so far?
Yeah, I'm very interested in that. My inclination at the moment, when I'm starting to think about writing again, is probably no. I tend not to write autobiographically, but writers are rather like actors in the respect that they kind of draw on their personal experience and their own emotions, their own sensations, kind of sense memories, and apply it to circumstances that aren't their own, that aren't necessarily things that they've lived through. And I've always felt, for the most part, writing my novels, able to do that. But I'm starting to realize that there's a whole generation whose experience of dating, of romance, is so fundamentally different from anything that I've lived through that probably I would have to research it in a way that might just be excruciating.
Oh, what, just asking the questions?
Yes.
The dad dancing element of asking those questions.
The dad dancing, the backward baseball cap of kind of asking about Tinder and being online. And I was watching, what's the Netflix show? Nobody Wants This. And I was kind of admiring it in some respects and thinking, wondering if I still had it in me to write a very classic romantic comedy like that. And then there was some dialogue about Venmoing me money, and I suddenly felt like this old dad who didn't really know what was going on anymore. And I feel that, I guess I feel that more and more, and I do feel especially that it's the case that there are lots of brilliant writers who are writing about it from first-hand experience and with a kind of immediacy and precision that probably I'm not capable of anymore. So I think probably it is something that I will...
But we don't want you to hand the baton on too quickly, because isn't it just the case that this is just the infrastructure of love, and that actually you probably could research if you could?
I guess so. I guess you have to hold on to the idea that the fundamental experiences of loneliness or rejection or elation remain the same. I just wouldn't want to kind of fudge the details, and I do find often that reading younger writers on this subject that there's a kind of first-hand quality to the writing that I really, really admire and probably am no longer capable of. And I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. You know, I think there's plenty of things that I'd love to explore that I haven't really dug into. I've never written about siblings. You know, I've never really, I've tended not to write contemporary novels. You know, there's a lot more that I can explore.
And do you don't feel that in love terms, that kind of running out of road feeling, because you just feel like you can take a turn into siblings or some other? Have you got anything brewing at the moment?
No.
We can get because you're on tour at the moment, and you've got plenty of other things that you're doing with your day. But do you have that kind of dream world that's working alongside?
No, I wish I did. I mean, I was talking to a novelist the other day who said that they have, you know, the next 5 novels lined up, like planes circling an airport, and they're just waiting to write them one after another. And I kind of dream. I mean, do you know what you'll do next? I'm
beginning to, but I haven't got quite as many events lined up as you have. But
I mean, note taking.
Yes, but that's more. I think for me it's more of a defense in some ways, because there's something about a book being out there that's incredibly exposing, and you know you've done it so many times before, but for me that coming up with a new idea feels like having a little secret in your back pocket that you can retreat to and not feel like everything is on the line with this one thing that you've put out there. But I imagine that you've had a particularly enormous couple of years with the adaptation of One Day. Does that kind of, you had a huge success with the book of One Day, but does that kind of new level of success with what happened with the Netflix show, which really became, I think, I can't remember the stats, but certainly the most watched show either side of the Atlantic for quite a while. Does that give you a slight imposter syndrome, or does that create more anxiety in any way about your writing?
I'm wary to pick anything bad out of it. I mean, I was extremely lucky to have my book adapted, and then to have it adapted again, you know, within quite a short period of time is fantastic. And I guess that the icing on that particular cake is that I loved the process. I mean, I was so happy working with those people, with the producers and Nicole Taylor, the wonderful writer, and the cast who I thought were amazing. It was a kind of, for me, it was by far the best production experience I'd ever had. And it was someone else adapting my work. I wrote 1 episode and I collaborated a lot with Nicole, but it was primarily, my role was primarily as an executive, and also for the first time kind of the senior member of the production, and much older than the directors, much older than the cast. I mean, they weren't born until episode 10, You know, it's insane. And so, I feel a certain distance from it. I feel it's very much their work, and I'm thrilled by the experience. I guess what happens afterwards is that there is a kind of self-consciousness. I've been doing a lot of events where You Are Here is a love story that takes place on a long walk. So it's a kind of hiking love story. And when I do events, there are a lot of people
You wouldn't call it a rambling love story, by the way, because it's extremely, brilliantly...
I mean, it's true that it kind of digs into that quite funny culture of you know,
ramblers,
anoraks and rambling and all of that, and takes the kind of mechanics of the structure of a classic urban romantic comedy and puts it in a field, you know, and youth hostels and pubs. And when I do events, I can see the people who are there for one day. You know, I can see that the much younger element who maybe...
Or I see who've watched the Netflix show. And they're the generation younger.
And wonder if they can talk about it. And that you know, kids my daughter's age, 16, 17. And I think there's almost a wariness, like, am I allowed to talk about it? For me, it's just been a wonderful experience and something that I'm proud of. And if I was forced to find something negative in it, it's that it made me, both back in 2010 and now, rather self-conscious about what comes next, about whether to pursue that or go off in a different direction. But, you know, that's a very minor gripe. I have huge freedom, and I love the experience so much. I'm very grateful for the talents of those people involved.
Can we just talk for a moment about the Love in One Day? And what would you say of all these different types of love that we're talking about? What were you trying to get at in One Day in terms of the love story? Was it more friendship? Was it more love that wasn't that you don't see for a long time and then and you realize it's there? Was it sort of when Harry met Sally, friendship into love? What were you really trying to say? Well,
I guess it differs from the experience of writing it, when I really wanted to write a big love song, you know, something big and emotional with strings and grand emotions and laughter and tears, and to write very much a romantic epic. And my experience now, which is watching it, I made it with friends. A great old friend of mine, Aubyn, was one of the exec producers, someone I've known for 30 years. And when I wrote the novel, I wrote it at the age that Dexter is at the end of the novel, 41. And I'd just become a father. And the novel was written as a kind of farewell to that time of your life in your 20s and 30s where love and friendship are hugely important. That's the motor that gets you through life. And then looking back at it from a vantage point 18 years later, from starting to write the book, with the child who was born when I was writing it, going off to university, it seemed to me to be much more a story about the influence of friends. You know, my writing career is very much down to my friends, very much down to the friends who said, stop acting, maybe try this, let me read this, I think you should show this.
Did they actually say stop acting?
Yeah. I mean, they were nice about it, but they would come to see me in these plays, having given some terrible kind of muggy performance, and they'd say, yeah, have you thought about applying for this script reading job? So I was very, very gently led away, and I guess looking back at it, I'm aware that two things struck me. One was that that's kind of what Emma and Dexter do for each other, that the story, it was about the influence of friends and what a wonderful thing that can be even when you fall out. And the other thing that struck me is they're hardly ever together. You know, we were talking about how slim the happy scenes are in Romeo and Juliet. One Day covers 20 years. They're only probably on the same scene for about 7 or 8 of those. Most of the time they're separated. And that's often how I feel about friendship as well. You know, I have friends who I wouldn't hesitate to call the most important people to me. And often I'll go quite long periods of time and not see them, but I'm kind of aware of their influence on my life and their presence, even when we're not talking. And that seemed to me to be a key element of it, that actually, even though the kind of, again, the scenes where they're happy and together are very, 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 very few, the pull that they have on each other is constant, and something that Nicole brought out brilliantly in the choices she made in the screenplays.
But I'm interested because didn't you adapt the bit where they are together and happy?
Yeah.
Because you didn't adapt all the episodes, is that right?
No,
Just
I
that one?
did. I did one episode. I did episode 13, which is the bit between, the penultimate episode, and
because that is when they're happy together.
Yeah.
And was that a challenge because it's the hardest bit to write?
it was the hardest bit of the novel as well. You know, when I handed in the first draft of the novel, the note I got from my editor, Nick Sayers, was that they're barely together. There's nothing really happening between them finally uniting in Paris and the ending. So you have to write, you have to fill that out a little more. And so I wrote three extra chapters that are very brief and are probably the weakest chapters in the novel because, again, happiness is not a subject. You know, there's very little to say about it.
But can I just push you for a second on that? Because in those, aren't those the chapters where they have sex but you don't write about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't even do that.
Can we talk about the fact that you don't write about? Because it's, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a great love story. It's now a love story that pretty much, I imagine everyone in this room knows what happens in that story. And yet it is remarkable when I read it again recently that there aren't any sex scenes in it.
No.
And you refer to, I think they have sex 3 times. They're having a conversation and he says, well, we had sex 3 times. And I think, wait, what? How did you deprive me of those scenes?
Yes.
Which you don't, obviously, in the adaptation. But why did you choose to avoid them in the book? Or not avoid them, but
Well, it's a combination of things. I guess the first thing is the structure of the book, which is that, you know, that things happen off the page and are mentioned but not shown. That's a slightly feeble excuse, I realize.
I wasn't going to say that.
The second, really, I guess, is probably my own anxieties about my abilities as a writer. I mean, you write a brilliant sex scene very quickly in the opening chapters of this book, and I was a little bit wary of it. I think there's a very old-fashioned, almost kind of 1930s fade to black at the end of the scene where they finally fall into bed together. And if I was writing it again, I would probably grapple with that. I would probably deal with that.
Because it feels like in You Are Here, your latest book, you do write about sex.
And Sweet Sorrow too. There's a little.
Oh yes,
kind of
and in
sex
Sweet
scene,
Sorrow, of course, which is a wonderful book about first love. But it did in You Are Here. It's sort of more infused in the book. Actually, you use the word erection and masturbation, which for David Nicholls' novel feels like whoa, watershed.
Yes,
but
no, it's quite raunchy.
Did you pause for a moment before typing those words?
Always.
Did you really?
I mean, it's not because I worry about my mom reading it or anything. And actually, I do use the word masturbation, but he doesn't masturbate.
No,
so
he considers
he
it.
considers it.
But then worries
So
about the
even
dong of the copper bath
Yes.
with his elbow, doesn't
Yes.
he? Yeah, it's a brilliant moment.
So yeah, I'm still chickening out a little bit. I guess I would make a distinction. I was reading what Sally Rooney was saying about this. You know, why wouldn't you write about it? You write about them eating, you write about them talking, you write about everything. You know, why wouldn't you write about this other perfectly normal part of human life? And it's part of it is what you wrote about in that article, which we've talked about before, which is the expectation that you are definitely writing autobiographically. You know, you're definitely writing about this thing that you have just done, which is quite exposing. And I guess I would also make a distinction between describing what's happening. I mean, there is a sex scene in You Are Here and Sweet Sorrow, but that it isn't erotic writing, you know. It isn't writing that's designed to arouse the reader. It's there to convey often some of the awkwardness or the anxiety of exposing oneself like that, the insecurity of it. So I feel able to do that very well, but a kind of orgasmic, erotic writing, I'm not sure if it's...
Well, I suppose it's the same thing you're talking about with love, which is the best bits are the worst bits. You know, that actually if it was all brilliant and going well, that it wouldn't be so good to write about, that actually what you explore are the gaps between how we feel and how we're presenting ourselves, and those excruciating moments when you're hoping to be someone that you're not, and all those things. And that's what you do brilliantly in You Are Here and in Sweet Sorrow, actually. Those kind of sex scenes, which really could be about sex or could be about something else.
Yeah.
It's really a sort of performance anxiety, I suppose.
There's sort of desire and longing, but also insecurity and anxiety and self-consciousness and all of those things. Whereas I think there's nothing wrong with how you pull off this thing of actually writing about successful sex in a really vivid and clear and evocative way.
Keep it quite short.
Yes. So I don't know, do you get self-conscious writing that? Do you feel...
I didn't writing it, I did afterwards.
Yeah.
I did think, yikes, this is going to be in a book, and because I'd also had an illness and I was writing in the first person, it's not such a massive leap for people to think erroneously, I hastily add, that I'm just writing autobiographically. So it is, but I didn't find actually the writing of it that hard.
No.
I found, but I did get nervous afterwards. But I'm really pleased. I'm really pleased I did write it, because actually the reason I wrote that sex scene was because I wanted it to contrast with their relationship. I think you can have really great relationships and not very good sex, and vice versa. And I wanted their relationship, which was beginning to go wrong, for there nothing to be wrong in the bedroom.
Yeah. And it's really brilliantly done. And I've been thinking about this a lot, because we talked a little bit in our interview about, I was reading Marion Keyes the other day. I guess another excuse I have for not writing about it is often I write in the first person, and a first person voice in a novel is often like a conversation with the reader, and particularly with a writer like Marion, you feel like she's chatting to you. And those scenes...
Have you heard her read her own books on audio? With that wonderful Irish voice. Oh my God, it's brilliant.
So it feels very natural for it to come from that voice and from that relationship with the reader, whereas a character like Douglas in Us, for him to suddenly describe this most intimate experience would actually be inconsistent.
He says it's satisfactory, does he?
Satisfactory. No, he's sort of,
more than satisfactory.
More than satisfactory than you'd expect,
and I think we haven't yet discuss Sweet Sorrow, and I'm not sure, we don't have time. I think, okay, we're going to send it out to the audience now, because I'm sure they'll have some better questions than I do. If anyone wants to stick their hand up and ask David a question, please do. There's a roving mic. And
Hi.
I just wanted to ask both of you, so I was really interested in what you were talking about the importance in writing about love of what is unsaid rather than what is said, and the barriers that naturally occur between people when they're trying to kind of convey emotions to each other. And I just wondered if both of you could tell us a bit about how you approach what is unsaid in your writing, because hypothetically you can understand how you can write beautifully about love, but it's harder to understand how a writer decides what to leave out and how much trust they place in the audience to sort of fill in the gaps.
Can I go first, so that if you answer brilliantly, it doesn't look so bad if I come afterwards? So, thank you for the question. And I think the really fun thing about writing novels is that you do get to, if you are writing in the first person and in the third person, but particularly in the first person, you get to have a chance to write the interior monologue, and the character doesn't have to say it at all. So you're constantly exploring what they're thinking and not saying, and in a way, it's the greatest gift for the novelist, and particularly the first-person writer, to be playing with that all the time. So, in a way, I think, sort of, for me, certainly, I like writing about unreliable narrators, and you spend quite a lot of time deciding what they're saying to themselves, and then what's actually happening that they're not even admitting to themselves in their own head. So there are sort of 3 levels of script that you're playing with all the time, and that's the fun, that's the joy of the scene.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. You have this terrific tool, you know, which is to almost annotate the dialogue. You are here, the structure of you are here is alternating third person. So they can have a conversation, and then you get a little, in the following chapter, commentary from Michael, what he thinks he's heard, and then later on from Marnie, what she meant to say and what she held back. So it's almost like the novel is almost like a series of asterisks, you know, with what real intentions, real thoughts, real inner lives. And that's a fantastic tool. And it took me a little while to learn how to do that, because I was initially a screenwriter. Screenwriters, you don't have that. There's no point putting in a paragraph underneath the dialogue that says what she meant to say was, or even putting it in brackets, because often the actors will just cross it out. But what you get instead is this wonderful gift of performance. So like in One Day, when Ambika says, there's a scene in The Maze where he reveals that he's going to get married and become a parent, and he says, are you pleased? And she says, pleased, I'm destroyed. And in a novel, you would have a little paragraph where you'd be able to say what she really feels, and I can't remember what happens in the novel, but you have this tool on screen. You have this other wonderful thing, which is Ambika, modest, sensational actor, having 4 different feelings just flutter across her face, and they're just as vivid, just as clear as anything you could put into prose. And that's, for me, why I love working with actors and directors and seeing things come to life, even when you lose a lot of the fundamental kit that you have as a novelist to explore people's inner lives and in a monologue.
Any other questions? One down here, a couple down here.
Hi there.
Hi, thank you both for such an interesting talk. I love both of your books. But I was wondering about, she mentioned the draft that didn't make it, David.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, have you both found that sometimes you have to write the wrong words before getting to the right ones?
Yeah, I very much, only that's the biggest thing I've thrown away, and it was such a long wasted time that I to protect myself from that, I tend to write a lot of sketchy stuff before I fill a notebook effectively. With You Are Here, it was called Spring, and it was about 40,000 words around the themes of post-COVID, social anxiety, walking, loneliness, solitude, the city and the country, pages and pages and pages of improvised dialogue. And I no longer type chapter 1 until that sketchbook feels substantial, feels as if there's a novel hidden in there, and that's when I start actually writing the novel. Whereas after One Day, I made the mistake of trying to improvise a novel, and I've realized now that isn't my way of writing, and so I now spend a lot more time thinking, sketching, taking notes before when you see in the movies novelists sitting down and typing chapter 1 and getting frustrated and throwing it across the room. That isn't my experience. My experience is you get this great sack of stuff, and you ideally put it to one side for a little while, and then you go back to it and delve into it, and your opening sentence may be in there, or it may be in chapter 3 or 4. It may be later in the book. The writing from the page 1 onwards in a linear, continuous way also isn't my way of writing. So the sketchbook is wonderful because no one is ever going to publish it, no one is ever going to see it, and I can write in a very free way and never again make that mistake of thinking that my subconscious has a novel in it, because it really doesn't, not without doing a lot of work first.
I've also got a bit of a hack, which is if I write directly onto screen and type in chapter 1 or anything that makes, as soon as it's on the screen, I get anxious about people reading it. So I write everything longhand first. And I'm incredibly chaotic, so it will go in the beginning of the notebook and then the end of the notebook, and then I'll lose the notebook and it'll go into a new notebook. So I'm constantly writing to-do lists, the first line of which is find old notebook and then find old to-do list. But I do find that writing longhand is the way that I stop myself from going off in the wrong direction for too long, because the anxiety and the pressure, I think, of seeing it in print and then imagining people reading it is what makes me go down sort of wasted blind alleys for too long.
When do you go to the computer? When do you start typing it?
So I'll do it scene by scene, but only once it feels juicy.
Okay.
And then the transcribing will be a kind of edit.
Yeah.
And then I feel like by the time I've transcribed it onto the screen, I still call it my first draft, which is cheaty because obviously I've written the first draft longhand. But by then it feels not disgraceful, and that if someone looked at it, it wouldn't be too excruciating. Oh, 5 minutes. Has anyone else? Question, yeah.
David, forgive me. Can I ask a question, which is just on the back of the question about throwing the novel away?
Yeah.
I've always been fascinated by Go Set a Watchman, the story of what happened there with the book that had been written, put under the bed, and then I can't remember whether she had died or that she was very...
She was just very unwell at that point, wasn't she, Harper Lee?
And the publishers or the agent said, actually, let's publish it. Because obviously the money involved in publishing a follow-up to Kill a Mockingbird was colossal. So, given the success of One Day, you can see where I'm going here, someone's got the copy of Married Love. They publish it. It's the work of David Nicholls. There's an audience that wants to read that. Do you have the right to stop people from reading that book? Or if an agent and publisher said, let's publish it anyway, how would you feel?
Oh yes, I've taken. It couldn't happen. No, it really couldn't happen. I mean, partly because it was terrible. It wasn't even called Married Love. It was just a very sour little kind of father and son bickering thing. It was only 30,000 words.
By the way, can we the 30,000 word things? I snagged on it earlier when you said I'd only written 30,000 words in a year. I was. That seems like a lot to me.
Well, I mean, it was barely... the thing that it shared with us was it was about a father and son going on a tour of Europe, but the roles were reversed. The father was slobby and irresponsible, and the son was kind of very repressed, and it was really unpleasant. There was no Connie in it. There was no marriage, and it was really just... they hadn't even left the country because there was no reason for them to do it. It didn't make sense. It was just... It's absolutely unpublishable, and it's also hidden away so deep in my computer that no one could ever get to it.
But do you think that she was treated badly in the publication of Go Set a Watchman?
Oh, well, I guess, what do I feel about that? Work being published posthumously without the author's permission. I guess there's an academic interest. I think where I get a little wary, I guess, is where it's really publicized and sent out there as a bestseller, when that really wasn't the intention of the author, and when it wasn't allowed to be revised and edited in the way that any novel should be. I mean, novels are much, much, much more collaborative than you're led to believe. My editor has a massive contribution to my novel, so does my agent, and none of that happened with her book, and it was almost like, yes, it was like publishing someone's sketches. Now, sketches are interesting. We're interested in the sketches of artists, we're interested in the diaries and letters of authors, but to try and make it feel like a finished work of art that can be sold to a large reading public in a satisfactory way, that seems unlikely to me, and I'm not against it ethically, but I probably wouldn't choose to read it because it hasn't been properly worked through. It'd be like eating a meal that's been carelessly prepared. Why would you do that when there's so many wonderful finished works out there? So that would be my inclination as a reader.
I think we've got time for one more question there. Just there. Oh. There's someone just standing behind. There we go. Yeah.
Hi.
Oh, no, sorry, we can't quite hear from here.
Oh, yes, so it's to do with, I realized that I should just finish that thing. I wrote one episode of One Day, and it was the bit where, you know, they're together and happy, and there was nothing in the novel to draw on. So I was writing new dialogue for characters who I hadn't really thought about for 18 years. And the great joy of that was writing them with those actors in mind, because the actors had been cast, and I'd already seen some footage. So it was really weird to give Emma and Dexter new material, but in a new incarnation, and a great, great pleasure. And the next stage of that question, I think you were talking about, do you ever watch it and think, no, that's not right? You sometimes think, no, that's not what I intended. You sometimes, I mean, I've always adapted my own work with the exception of One Day. And with One Day, every now and then I think, oh, I wish they hadn't cut that line, or they wish they hadn't cut that joke. But my overwhelming experience with One Day, which is the only time it's ever happened, was, oh, that's brilliant. Oh, how clever. I'm so relieved they've cut that aspect. They've toned down this aspect of Dexter's personality. For me, the best scene in the entire series isn't in the novel. It's a scene in episode 14 in a box room. Towards the end of the show, Nicole wrote a beautiful scene, and given the opportunity, I would love to reopen the manuscript and tuck it back in, because it's much, much better than anything I had there. So my general experience is of the work being embellished, improved, and ever so occasionally cut down in a way that I wouldn't choose. You know, it's like those DIY decoration shows where, you know, someone's decorated your home. Every now and then you walk in and you go, oh, this isn't right. Mostly, especially with One Day, I walked in and went, oh, this is transformed, it's magnificent, thank you. And that was my overall experience.
So I think we've come to the end of the session now. It was such a great pleasure talking to you.
And you too, thank you very much.
And anyone who would like to receive a signed copy of David's book, there are books of I Think You Are Here and possibly One Day at the back of the room. But thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely to talk to you. Thank you for coming.